learners, and welcome back to the channel. So this is a new UPSC series, and in this series I'll try to cover the entire syllabus of the UPSC preparation for civil services examination as much as I can, at least. But if still you want videos on specific topics or on some specific chapters from some particular books, you can just pin me in the comments and I'll try to do it. Anyways, this is from UPSC Factory. Here, this is I'm doing from this UPSC Factory app, and here I'll be in this today's video. Sorry, I'll be covering the revision notes from Polity Historical Evolution. So let's start. Now, before starting, I would like to tell you one more thing. To crack this examination, this particular examination, in fact, to ace all of your examinations, one key point that you must remember is that you must understand every particular thing, everything completely, thoroughly, and in depth. Now, I might fail at some points where I may not be able to explain to you the concept very clearly or completely as I should or as you must understand in order to crack the examination. So I request you that you also read these very same things from some other source which can explain in a better manner. This is a very, very critical point, and I request you to remember it in mind. So don't just hop onto my train and just go along. You should also keep in mind some other important sources of information from where you can read and prepare. Okay, so starting now. There are various rules and acts which were passed before independence which play a vital role in shaping our constitution. Some of the important historical events are listed down below. So backstory. The thing is that when our country hadn't gained its independence, like when we were still the slaves of the Englishmen, the Britishers, there were some rules that the British East India Company had applied on on the colonists, especially our colony. Or you can say that there were some rules and regulations that were passed by the Crown itself on the British East India Company. And these many rules and regulations, these helped shape our constitution and our current laws, because these were very relevant, very applicable. Like if you govern a country and you formulate a basic set of rules, now these a simple set of rules can be applied in governing any country, right? Like there should be law and order. This particular rule can be applied in every country in the world. And that there should be law and order in America, there should be law and order in India, there should be law and order in Canada, not America, because America as a whole is not a country. America is the name of a continent. USA is a country. So these basic simple set of rules can be applied in every country. So this is what we'll be reading here. These set of rules, this simple set of rules, or these simple basic acts that were passed by the Crown in India, and which helped later on shape the basic framework. Basic framework here means the basic structure of our constitution. So the first of these was the Regulating Act of 1773. So in order to remember this, you must remember two specific key points. First is regulating. Regulating means here to regulate, because this act was passed to regulate the Indian affairs. So from regulate, you can remember regulating. So it is a regulating act, and regulating act of what? 1773. That is 1773. And to remember it easily, I'll tell you a little quick shortcut. It means first you'll have to keep in mind 1. That is the first unit of natural numbers. The first number you can think of, maybe it is 1. Then then comes 7, and then again comes 7, and then comes 7 minus 1, that is 6, and the half of 6, that is 3. So first here it would be 1, then 7, then again 7, then second 7, then the first 7 minus the first number, that is 1, which becomes 6, and the half of 6, that is 3. So you should kind of, like I'm trying to say, that you should form links with other things so you can easily remember the numbers and the dates and the names. So this is how I remember it. That first is obviously the first number, that is 1. Then comes 7. Then again comes 7, and then comes half of 1 less than 7. That is 3. So this was the Regulating Act of 1773. And what was Regulating Act for? For regulating the Indian affairs. So from this I remember that it was a regulating act. So it was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. Now this point is important because before this act was passed, all the things that were taking place in India were not by the order of the British government but by a specific company, a company named English East India Company. English East India Company. So this company on its own, without any specific orders from the British government, that is, fought wars in India and occupied lands. But after this, because this company had its root in some other country, so the country had a government, so it started to control this company. Now to understand it more thoroughly, I'll give you a better example. Let's say that we have in India, we have the company Adani Groups, right? So Adani Group sent some of its company members to, let's say, some island, some foreign island, where there are some people living. Let's say 100 or 150 people are living on this island. Now what happens is that these islanders don't welcome these company officials. So rightfully, in a right manner, if that, then the company shouldn't go to this island if the islanders don't want the company officials, right? They should return back. But in this case here, what happens is that this Adani group goes onto the island and occupies it forcefully. Now this Adani island, this group of this Adani groups has occupied the island forcefully on its own, right? Now the Indian government has nothing to do with it. But now what happens is that Indian government comes to know of this move by the Adani group. It gets to know that Adani group has forcefully occupied an island somewhere. So obviously, because the Adani group has its roots in India, right? It is operating from India. So so it also falls under the jurisdiction of the Indian government. So the Indian government has some power of the power on the company. So it directs the company that we will provide you some basic sets of rules and regulations, and according to that only you can rule. If you cannot follow those rules and regulations, then we do not allow you to occupy that island. Remove your forces from there, come back, or else we will directly occupy that island. We will send our own forces and occupy it, and you must withdraw your men. So this is the similar thing that happened in India. So the English East India Company came to India. It forcefully occupied its land. It actually first came, as everyone already knows, it first came as a trading company, but slowly it occupied its land. And later, the British government gave specific instructions to the English East India Company on how to rule there, or if to rule at all. Just a sec. Okay, sorry for the interruption. Now, it recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company. So, like I said, that before this act was passed, these political and administrative functions of the company were not recognized by the British government. They were doing all of this on their own. They had no relation with the British government in this. Like, the company came on itself, they occupied the lands and started ruling the people. But the British government did not give any permission to the English East India Company to rule people of other foreign lands. But after this act was passed, it became legal. It legally gave permission to the company to occupy those lands, these Indian lands, and rule over these people. That is our Indian people. It laid the foundations of central administration in India. This act also laid the foundations of centrally administering in India. Like what central administration is a kind of like a systematic administration, you can say, that there is one center of power and then there are several branches out of it, and these people rule several other deities. You can say like the kind of administration that is currently working in India. This is a kind of central administration. In short, central administration can be formed as systematic administration. It designated the governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal. So before this, the governor of Bengal was someone from not from the British government, someone from the English East India Company. And they themselves became rulers and gave titles to themselves. Like, I go to some foreign land and I occupy all the people there, and I suddenly claim that I am the ruler of this land, or you should call me governor of, let's say, I go to a land XYZ and then I with some of my troops and occupy the place there, and then I declare that from today on all the people here must call me the governor of XYZ. So this is what happened. But then my country gives me specific instructions and information, and they tell me that from now on your designation will be governor general of XYZ, not governor but governor general of XYZ. So before this I was on my own, all the profit went to me and I was free to rule whatever however I liked. But after this act was passed, it was regulated. I think it's proper that we should understand the meaning of regulating first, right? It's regulating meaning, here it is. So regulate means control or maintain the rate or speed of a machine or process so that it operates properly, or basically it means control something by means of rules and regulations. All right. So regulating means control someone through some specific rules or set of instructions. So now after this regulating act was passed, the company or the Indian government, I'm talking about my own example now here. Obviously this is a hypothetical example. So now the Indian governments, because all my parents, all my property, everything, all my roots are in India, right? If I had completely moved over to that XYZ company and I have cut off my connection with Indian government and India, then the Indian government was not subjectable to, then I was not subjectable to any of the any to follow any instructions from the Indian government, because I have completely cut off my own connection and I have formed my own country, XYZ country. I have formed my own country and now I'm the ruler of this country, and the other countries should treat me like they're equal. But since I have all my roots in India, I have all my connections in India, and I am still a citizen of India. So it is like so I went to that other country, so I still fall under the rules and regulations of India, right? Whatever the rules and regulations that India has set for all of citizens, I also fall under it. But now what happens is that I go to some other lands and occupy it, so the government of India can make me follow whatever they wish. Like they can control me, you can say they can literally control me however they like. So they tell me that from now on your designation would be governor general of XYZ and not governor of XYZ. And what happens is also they remove me. So what they say is that from now on we government officials will set one of our person and not citizens or members of the company, but we will send our own government members, government officials, to go over there and rule that land on the behalf of the British government, or in this case on the behalf of the Indian government. So India says that we will send one of our own and they will rule on our behalf, that is on the behalf of Indian government, in the land of XYZ, and you would be removed from the position, and instead a new position with the same power would be created, which will be called now Governor General, and we will send one of our own people there to have this position, to take charge of this position and then govern the land according to the rules that we will set thereof from now on. In the case of British India, what happened is that they removed the position of Governor General and they removed the position of Governor of Bengal, because up until now only the area of the Bengal was occupied, not all of India. Whenever we talk about India in this text, we only refer to the part of India that was occupied by the British, only that part. So now, since they had only occupied Bengal till now, so the governor of Bengal was changed to Governor General of Bengal, and the first Governor General of Bengal was Lord Warren Hastings. You can remember his name through haste. That he did very haste in occupying this new position in this new land. So his name was Lord Warren Hastings because he made great haste in occupying this new land, because he was very eager to go and occupy this new land, rule these people. So he was in a great haste, and that is why his name Lord Warren Hastings. You can just form a kind of connection from Warren Hastings to haste, right? It provided the establishment of a Supreme Court at Calcutta. So it also established, according to this rule, they also established a Supreme Court which was at Calcutta, and it had one Chief Justice and 3 other judges. Alright, and now you should also remember the date. It was in 1774. So the regulating act was in 1773, right? Like 177 and then a half of 1 minus 7, that is 3, so 1773. And 1 year after that, the Supreme Court of Calcutta was established, just 1 year after that. So it shouldn't be that hard to remember, right? Okay, so yeah, and moving on, uh, this is done. So this was the regulating act, and now we will move to amending act 1781. So Calcutta is obviously now Kolkata, so but I still request you that you write Calcutta instead of Kolkata, because at that time the name was still Calcutta. Okay, so this was a regulating act. Regulating act was, you can say, just a kind of backbone for all the new acts that were yet to come. And obviously Calcutta or Kolkata is a state in West Bengal. Is not a state, is a city in West Bengal. So you can clearly see that the occupied land was only under the area of Bengal. And after it now comes the amending act. So you can remember the date of amending act through this. One in the starting, one in the end, and in the middle it would be 7 8, like 7 and then 7 plus 1 8. So it's you can remember all of it through one, that 1 and then 7 plus 1 8, and then again 1. So you can, or you can remember it like this, that 7 and 8 are enclosed in 1 on both the sides, in the starting and in the end, and in the middle 7 and 8 are encaged or enclosed by 1s. So in this way you can easily remember the date 1781. So 1781, like this. So it shouldn't be so hard to remember the dates. You can just form these kind of quick shortcuts to remember them. That's what I'm trying to say. To rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. 1773, like 1, 7, 7, half of 7 minus 1, that is 3. So to rectify, that is, they're saying that there were some defects when they passed the Regulating Act of 1773. I believe they were in a haste, just like Warren Hastings, and so they passed this act in a hurry, and there were some defects left. So the British Parliament passed the amending act. Amending act means to amend, to change something, to make a change. So they passed this act to make a change in the regulating act, and hence its name amending act. That is amending the regulating act. Okay, so this is how you can remember its name, amending. This act was passed to amend the regulating act, and that is why it was named amending act. And when was it passed? In 1781. 1781. And it was also known as the Act of Settlement or Declaratory Act 1781. I'm sorry if there's some kind of speech impairments that I'm having, and that's because I have my braces on, and I'm having a lot of difficulty in speaking because my jaw cuts down every time I try to speak. So I'm really sorry for it if you aren't able to understand or hear me properly. But still, if you have any questions, I always give my WhatsApp number below, so you can just send me text there, or I'll pin it down in the comment section later on. The key provision of this act was to demarcate the relations between the Supreme Court and the Governor General in Council. So what happened in that they established a Supreme Court and the Regulating Act, right? Regulating Act of 1773. But now there were some issues now, right? Like even in today's society, in our modern time in India, we have issues between the government and the Supreme Court, right? There were issues between the Supreme Court General and the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi at her time, right? If you remember, it's a very famous case. So what happens that they also starts to face the same issues, and now to settle these issues, that is why this was called the Act of Settlement, because it was also made to settle the issues between the Governor General and the Supreme Court. So hence the name Act of Settlement. It settled the question of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So this act settled that which areas or which people or which post, and you can say what falls under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So they said that the Governor General does not fall under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, and that is the Supreme Court does not have a right to judge the Governor General. So that is why I think it's incomplete information given here. But anyways, this is just a brief overview. Like, this is not a detailed in-depth study. This is just quick notes, so you can have an idea of what these things were before studying everything or all the books regarding them in detail. So if you also want a full video on the preparation of the UPSC, on the, you can say, strategy on how to prepare for it, I'll also make one on it. So it settled the question of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. That is done. And now comes the Pitt's India Act 1784. Why was it called Pitt's Act? Because it was named after a person. So you can remember Pitt's Act. And now what comes now? His 17. So 17 is same. 17 is always same. It's 1773, 1781 or 1784. 17 will always stay same. So 17 is always there. What changes is the last two digits. So in the starting, what the last two digits are 73, right? Like 73. The last two digits in the Supreme Court case are 74, because Supreme Court was established in 74. And then in the amending act it was 81, and in this act it's 84. So I've already told you the methods to remember the other dates. In this case you can remember 8, then half of 8, that is 4. So 17 will remain same, and then comes 8, and then half of 8, that is 4. So 1784. So Pitt's India Act came in 17, that is always there, because it's the 18th century, right? So it will always remain 1700 until the end of the century, that is. So because if it's written as 1700 or something, we always call it as 18th century. In the similar case, if it is written as 1802, 1804 or 1807, something similar like it, we will always call it the 19th century, like one more. So Pitt's India Act came in 17, then 8, and then half of 8, that is 4. So 1784. Indian affairs came under direct control of British government in Britain. So before this act, the company was allowed to, okay, you can handle all the affairs, and but we'll just provide you some simple set of rules according to which you have to rule there, right? Like, you are ruling on our, you weren't ruling on our behalf. They were ruling on themselves. They had all the profits, or maybe they didn't. But the thing is that they were still the rulers. The company people were still the rulers. That is, the English East India Company was still ruling in India, but according to the regulations or according to the instructions provided by the British government. But after the Pitt's India Act of 1708 and then half of it for 1784, now the British government directly ruled in India. That is, they directly sent all of their people. They directly sent all the government officials in various positions in India to rule the people. And now all the company people were called off back. All the company people were called back, that you come back, you do your business somewhere else, or do it in India. But now you are no more rulers, you are only businessmen again. You cannot rule anywhere, and we will handle this ourselves. We will rule it. Now you go get lost. You have already done enough for us, and now we will reap all the profits of the Indian people and of the company also. So that is why I mostly believe that it is not the company's fault. It was actually British government's fault. Or maybe the British government was thinking something better too. Maybe they realized that the company people were not effectively ruling the people, because the company often took bribes, and there was a lot of corruption when the company was ruling the Indian people. They often took bribes and gifts from tribal chiefs in order to get their work done effectively or speedily. But after Indian continent came under the direct rule of the British government, it handed all those functions to government officials to consider to handle them in a proper and effective manner, efficient manner, so that the bribery and the commission, the corruption, all of that could be lessened. Indian affairs now distinguished between the commercial and political functions of the company. Just like I said previously, that now the company was asked to handle its commercial affairs and not the political ones. The political affairs in India or in Bengal as of now would be handled by the British government, and the commercial affairs would be handled by the company. So the company cannot no more be a ruler. It will only be a business or a trading company. Allowed the court of directors to manage the commercial affairs, and created a new body called Board of Control, which had 6 members to manage the political affairs. Thus it established a system of dual government. So now there were dual government. Now you're saying that I just told that the government would control the Indian continent and not the company. So how are they still considering it in the government? because now the company had become a kind of part, become kind of one with the government. So the company and the government were kind of like similar people. But what happens now is that the government still obviously there were some differences which the government and the company both recognize. So what happens is that previously the board of directors were controlling, the court of directors, were controlling the area of Bengal. They were ruling it also under obviously the British government. But what now happens is that the British government gives specific expressive instructions to the court of directors that now you can only handle the government related also, the government related and non-government related affairs, but only in the case of commercial, like only in the case of business. Like they can still set rules or regulations that nobody else can trade here, or the prices will be set at this price, or these countries would be allowed to trade in this area of Bengal, or these countries cannot be allowed to trade in Bengal. Like these all these government or non-government tasks could be done by the court of directors, but all the other political related tasks like the police force, the defense force, or the revenue economy, or the construction of roads, or like setting up other political agents, all of these tasks would be done by the board of control, which was now set up. This was a new this was now new set up, completely new. Like this was not before. The board of control did not exist before, only the court of directors did. So the board of control was established by the government, which consisted of how many? 6 members. And they were tasked with managing the political affairs of Bengal. And that is how it established a form of dual government. Like the court of directors would handle all the task, all the everything related to commercial affairs, and the board of control would handle everything related to the political affairs, both obviously coming under the jurisdiction of the British government. So you can say like the British government is the ultimate force, and then it's separates out two parties, one for commercial and the other for political, but still they are obviously under the British government. If we had something else, I could explain it to you properly. So let me first download a kind of white. So now we're on the whiteboard, and let me try to explain it to you more clearly how this Spits India Act worked, and how the court of directors and the board of directors was differentiated. Like the court of directors, yeah, and board of control. Sorry, the court of directors and board of control. So this here is the, please mind my handwriting and lousy text. So this is the British government here. So the British government now bifurcated its functions into two different parts. The first part here is the, let's say it's the commercial one. This is the commercial part, and this here is the political part, right? So the British government now differentiated the functions of the government, or you can say the tasks. You can say the tasks that are needed to be performed in a country in order to run it well and efficiently. It divided into two parts: commercial and political. Commercial is everything related to, that is the commerce. Commerce, for example, you can say trade and uh, trade and productivity, manufacturing, and all that, factories and everything included. And political is all the rest: how a country should run, what are the rules and regulations it must follow, what are the laws that must apply to the country, how the police and the task force will work, and everything else. So now the this task was given to the commercial and the political. Now here the commercial task was given to the board of directors, was it, or something else? Court of directors. So here the commercial task was given to the court of directors. Here it was given to the court of directors, and the political task was to be handled by the board of control. The board of control, which had how many? 6 members. It had 6 Oh my god, it's moving really slow. It had 6 members, if you remember it right. I don't know why it's writing so slow. It's written something as yeah, so it has 6 members nevertheless. So this was how the how it now worked, and this is where the differentiation, the bifurcation comes in here. This is the dual form of government working at the commercial and the political level simultaneously. Two different kind of governments working. One was controlled by the court of directors, the other was controlled by the board of control. Okay, moving on. Empowered the board of control to supervise and direct all operations of the civil and military government or revenue of the British possessions in India. So now what was the task of the board of control, this newly formed authority? What was its task, its work? What was its duty? Its duty was to supervise and direct means according to whatever it think is suitable or best for them to follow, form such a set of rules and regulations so that it affects the civil and military government, like civil affairs, all the civil affairs just like I told you about, and all the military affairs containing the police and the military, all those military affairs and all the civil affairs like the road and transport authority, the migration issues, or you can say any kind of religious happenings that might take place, or any kind of, like we have several kinds of processes in India, like the UIADI, all the identification processes, any kinds of criminal activities that also falls under the board of control, like any kind of migration related issues, any kind of road and transport issues, like all of these works, any kind of construction of buildings, or uh, like water supplies, sewage supplies, and all sewage treatments, and all of this falls under the civil affairs, right? And these civil affairs were to be directed, supervised and controlled by the board of control, as also the military affairs. And now what is left is the trade and commercial, uh, like trade and commercial duties, all of these are left, which were handed over to the court of directors, right? So this is how a dual system of government took place after the Pitt's India Act of 17, then 8, and then half of it, that is 4, 1784. So now comes the Charter Act of 1813. All of the previous ones, 17 was same. Now 17 changes to 18. Here 18 it is. Charter Act 18. And then again comes 1, and then comes 3. So you should try to remember it like this: 1, 8, 1, and then how many times have 1 come? 2 times, right? Add it to 1, it becomes 3. Then 1813. So let me try to explain it here again. Before that, let's cut all of this out like this. And where's the delete function? Shit, I'll just have to remove it all by hand. Anyways, I'll try to explain to you the details, sorry, the dates out. Remember, the dates is 18, and then 1, and then 3. Okay, so to remember it, remember these first 2 words only. It's 18. Earlier it was 17 in all the dates, right? Earlier the dates were, what were the dates? Try to recall them along with me. It was 1773 when the Regulating Act came, then 1774 when the Supreme Court of at Calcutta was established. After that, 1781 when the Amendment Act came, and then when the Pitt's India Act was passed, it was 1784. So if you noticed, all of the first 2 words here are the same, that is 17. Sorry, here. So all of these things happened in the 18th century. That is why 17 is in the starting. Now what we need to remember is just these last 2 words. These last 2 words here. So the first word here is 17. So 7, 7, they form a pair, and then it comes 3. That is half of 1 less than 7. So 3. In the second case, in this case, it becomes 17, and then 7, again 7 is 3, but it becomes, this last word becomes 4. The last word here, the last word, that's the focus. So the last word in the first 2 cases, the last word changes from 3 to 4. In the next 2, it is 1 and then becomes 4. So in the third one, that is the one concerned, the one concerned with what came Amendment Act. I again chose the wrong one. So the one concerned with Amendment Act, it has one in the starting here, it has one in the starting, it has one in the end. 17 here obviously will remain the same. What we need to remember is that 8 will come in between, that is 7 plus 8, sorry 7 plus 1 then 8, 7 plus 1 8. So 1 in the starting, 1 in the end. 7 is obviously there, then 7 plus 1 8. In the end one, 17 will remain the same, right? 17 will remain the same. Then comes 8, and then comes half of 8, that is 4. So 1784. So in all the previous one, the 17 was all the same, and we had to just remember the last two numbers. But in this case, the first two numbers has also changed, that is 17 has become 18. So now you need to remember this word 18, and now you have to remember 13 too. How will you remember 13? You remember 13 in such a way that it's first 1, then 8, then again 1. So 1, then 8, then again 1. And then how many times has 1 come? It has come 2 times, right? Like first is here, second is here, so 1 has come 2 times. And then add it to 1. Add it to 1, 1. So what does it become? It becomes 3. So here would be 3. So just try to link it like this. This is one method that I tried to explain to you, but you can use your own methods to try to remember these dates. Without wasting any more time, let's move on. So Charter Act came in. I was just telling you the method how I remember the dates. So now the Charter Act comes in 18-1, and then 2 times 1 has already come, so plus 1 3, 1813. It ended the monopoly of the English India Company. So the full name is English East India Company, but here we're talking about it in brief. Like most places it's written only as East India Company. So the Charter Act ended the, so you must remember that before this it was the monopoly of the East India Company, that nobody but only the East India Company could trade with India, right? Could trade with India. So let's say that this part here, this part, let's say this part is the map of India. I know it's a very brutal image of India, but let's say this part here is India, and then up to this part here, so this part is Bengal. So and here is the British Empire. Here it is the British Empire. So the British Empire says to its East India Company, East India Company. So there are several countries in an empire, and one of the biggest companies of British Empire or the British government is the East India Company. So the East India Company proposes, gives a proposal to the British government, here, that we will give you, let's say 20,000 euros or 30,000 euros, or let's say that, yeah, we will give you 1 million euros per year. Okay, we will give you 1 million euros, and you give us a certain right, you give us a certain privilege that only we can trade in India. India here is all of India. All of this land is now considered part of India. So before 1947, obviously there was no India, but they collectively called this part, that is our current India, and the lands of Pakistan here. Wait, just let me go back a little. So they called this part that we're currently calling India, this part, then the lands of Pakistan, the lands of here it was Afghanistan, I guess it was here. So they called all these surrounding parts a part of India as well. So they told to British government, they told the British government that we will pay you $1 million. It's just a hypothetical situational number. Only I'm trying to explain the situation here. The exact numbers are not the same. So they said it will pay you some amount of money, and to give us a monopoly that nobody but only us, only the English East India Company can trade with India, and no one else can, right? So they used to give some money to the British government, and the British government allowed them to trade in India, and no other country, no other company of the British Empire was allowed to trade with India. It cannot control the whole of the world, obviously, but it controlled all the other companies that were in British government, in the British Empire. So it asked all the other companies that you cannot trade to India. Sorry, it is cancelled, and only the East India Company can go and trade in India. So this was the situation up until now. Up until now, that is 1801 and 3. So up until now, only the East India Company could trade in India. But after the Charter Act of 1830, this monopoly was ended, and now and the company actually had two monopolies that it would rule here in the land of India. India, my God, how have I created this? My drawing really sucks. Okay, so I'll try to create it here. Oh, I guess it's a distinguishable image at least. So this area is India and this is China. Yeah, let me do it. This is China. God, I'll try to create it as worse as I can. This is China. Oh shit, it stinks. Anyways, so the company had, that is the East India Company, had two monopolies. It had two monopolies over China and over India. So after the Charter Act of 1813, the British government ended the English East India's monopoly of India, but retained its monopoly over China. It said that okay, you are allowed to trade in China, and no other company of the British Empire is allowed to trade in China. But now the other companies of the British Empire can trade in India. Okay, they can still trade in India. Trade with China and trade in tea with India. Yeah, so one thing more to notice here is that the company was allowed to retain the monopoly of trade in tea with India, so that the other companies can trade with India in other commodities, but only the East India Company can trade in India in the case of tea. So only the English East India Company can sell tea to India, and no other company is allowed to sell tea to India. They can all trade in other things like spices or furniture, or other kind of any kind of material. You can trade in any kind of material, but just not in tea. Thus trade with India for all commodities except tea was thrown open to all British subjects. This lasted till 1833, so this lasted only for 20 years, when the next charter abolished the trade of the company. So this was until when? Only for 20 years, and after that even the trade monopoly was taken away from East India Company. Like I said, this is not a in-depth and detailed knowledge of these acts. This is only a brief overview, and that is why you must read in detail these very acts from some other notebook, from some other book, or some other source of information. Charter Act 1813 for the first time explicitly defined the constitutional position of the British territories in India. So the Charter Act for the very first time, before this there was no exact definition like where the British territories in India stand. So before that there was all a mixed shape. It was not written in the exact constitutional papers that India is also a colony of British Empire. So let's say this here is our India. Done at least a little better job. So this here, let's say it is India, and here it is the British Empire's rule, or in this part, if you can understand it. Okay, so in this part it is the British Empire's rule. So it was not written in any official documents that this area of India is a British colony. They only gave some specific rules on how to rule these areas, but they did not include this particular term that this is the British territory. But after the Charter Act of 1813, it gives specific instructions that this part of India, this particular part of India, that is only this one, this part of India is the British territory, that is, it is ruled by Britain. Then the Charter Act of 1833 came, that is 20 years after the first Charter Act. Final step, this was the final step towards centralization. Governor General of Bengal now became the Governor General of India. So I believe that they had acquired more parts of India by 1813. Obviously they had, since the revolt of 1857 just came a little later. So it's not explained very clearly in here. That is why I'm trying to tell you that they must have acquired a much larger part of India till the 1813. Obviously because they didn't stop only here. So you can say that they acquired a great part of India till 1813. And now they started saying that these are the British territories in India. And so, because they had acquired a very great part of India, so they started calling it India itself, and they changed the position of Governor General of Bengal to Governor General of India. It was changed in 1833 through the Charter Act, through the Second Charter Act. And who was the first Governor General of India? It was Lord William Bentinck. William Bentinck. So you can remember Tink through tick, like Tink, Tink. Tink is similar to tick, right? So he ticked on the form that okay, I will be the Governor General of India. So he was given a form of Governor General of India, Governor General GG. Wow. Governor General of India. So he was presented a form of Governor General of India, and he was said that if you want to become the Governor General of India, you put a tick, and if you don't want to, then put a cross. So he put a tick that yeah, I want to become the Governor General of India, and from then his name became Governor General William Bentinck. Tink. Like this is only a method to how you can remember his name, or how you can remember who was the first Governor General of India. So it was William Bentinck. Governor General was vested with all civil and military powers. Now, before this, before the Governor General, obviously, so like remove all this, remove all this. I know it looks cool, right? This is the Microsoft word, Microsoft whiteboard. Yeah, really cool to write on whiteboards nowadays. So I also thought I'd try it. So before now, it was controlled by what? Board of Control. Right, Board of Control was formed by the Pitt's India Act. I believe it was through the so Pitt's India Act formulated a board of control which obviously consisted of 6 members. I mean 6 members, and before now these six members of the board of control, they controlled the civil plus military affairs. Right, they were the ones who controlled the civil plus military affairs. But now this power was given to whom? This power was given to the GG. This power was given to GGI, that is the Governor General of India. So before, this power was with the Board of Control. Now the Board of Control was, I don't know if it was demolished, it was broken down or what, but these powers, these very similar, very same powers were now given to the Governor General of India. That is now William Bentinck. Tick. So Tink. Okay. And this was after the Second Charter Act of 1833. It deprived the governors of Bombay and Madras of their legislative power. So here it tells us, here it gives a clue that by now the East India, sorry, not the East India Company, obviously. Now it had become the British government. So the British government had acquired Madras also. And obviously they all had their respective governors. So it took the powers from the governors of Bombay also. Bombay was also occupied by the British government by now. So what were the 3 constituencies under British government under now that we absolutely know of, absolutely sure of? It was Bengal, Bombay and Madras. Madras, I believe, is Chennai now. So it was Bombay, Madras and what else? Yeah, Bengal. So it took the legislative powers out of the governors of Bengal and Madras. They did not have any legislative, any law-making power, and it was in fact given to the Governor General of India, the GGI, that is Lord William Bentinck. Don't remember that tick It's Tink, Tinck. So it's not William Bentinck, it's William Bentinck. It's only similar to tick, that's why I said to remember it that way. After that, the laws made under the previous acts were known as regulations, while the laws made under this act were known as acts. So all those previous laws like the Regulation Act, the Pitt's India Act, the Charter Act 1 or the Amendment Act, all those were from now on known as regulations. That yeah, we need to follow these regulations. We should follow, at least you can say we should follow regulations, but these new laws were now known as acts, that you must follow them. Like you do not have you won't be punished to break any regulations. You may be slightly charged, but you will be punished to break an act. This is the difference between an act and a regulation. Or we can just check it out what act versus regulation is. Here, act versus regulation. Acts are broad laws that are passed, and the regulations are guidelines that dictate how the legal provisions of the act should be applied. Just like I said, regulations are not passed before the House of Parliament but are needed to be published in the official. Act is the parent, like regulations passed in supplement and are subordinate. So the regulations help in assessing as to how the act should be applied, like how the act should be applied to people, how the act should be made to work. This is defined through the regulations, but the act is the real thing. It ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, making it purely administrative body. So now it ended all the powers of the East India Company and made it a subsidiary of the British government. Then now you will completely work under us. You are no more a trading company, and you will only work with us as an administrative body. You will help us govern these people. Now you are no more a company, but now you are part of the government. Introduced law member Macaulay in Governor General's Council. So they introduced this. I don't know what's special about this particular member, but they introduced this law member. His name was Macaulay in the Governor General's Council. So obviously the Governor General had his own council. Then came the third Charter Act, again 20 years later. That is in 1853. So both these Charter Acts have come in a 20 years gap. The first one was 1813, then the second one was in 1833, then the third one is in 1853. So it separated the legislative and executive functions of the Governor General's Council. So we know nowadays that we have a legislature and an executive separately in India. So this was done in 1853. The Governor General's Council was separated into two, one which had the legislative powers, the other which had the executive powers. Provided for addition of 6 new members called legislative councils to the council known as the Indian Legislative Council, Central. So now this was for the center, obviously that's why the word central is written here. So it provided for 6 new members. So it said that 6 new members will be in the Governor General's Council, and these will be called legislative councillors. And this would be included in which council? So basically you can say, like, here's the Governor General's Council. Here is the Governor General's Council. Right, so this is the Governor General's Council. Now it was divided into two parts. Here is the legislative. I hope you can at least understand it. I know it's written in very, very bad handwriting. Legislative and executive. So this was divided into two parts. Now this was also right, but the Legislative Council was given a proper name, was given an Indian Legislative Council. That is, I think, yeah, Indian Legislative Council. So this council here, it was named. What was this name? So we know that the function is legislative. The function is legislative, but what do we call it? We give it some name, right? Like the Parliament. The Parliament is a name. We know what is the use of the Parliament. It is a legislature. But what is its name? Its name is the Parliament. Or just like the Duma is the name of the Legislative Council in Russia. So similar way we gave it a name of Indian National Council. Indian National Council. So do write in the comments whether you like this name or the current name, that is the Parliament. So it was given the name of the Indian Council, Indian National Council, and a new set of instructions was passed for this new council, that it would have 6 members. It would have 6 members, and they would be known as legislative councillors. They would be known as legislative councillors. It introduced for the first time local representation in the Indian Legislative Council. So before this, before that is the Charter Act of 1853, both this, that is both the Legislative Council and the Executive Council, were counted within one council, that is within the Governor General's Council itself. But now it was divided into two parts. One part was Legislative Council, the other was Executive Council. They both reported to the Governor General though. They both reported to the Governor General. They both came under the Governor General's Council, but still they were now named separately. So they were given separate names. And now what they said is that we will also include local Indian people into the Indian National Council. Before now, all the people here were who? All the people here were just Britishers. But now they says that in the legislative part, in this part, we will include local Indian people to increase India's representation. So this was done through the Act of 1853. It introduced an open competition for civil services. The covenanted civil services were thus thrown open to the Indians also. Now this act is very, very, very important. The Charter Act of 1853. So you must remember it. So up until now, before now, what was the thing? That the civil service examination that we are currently preparing for, it was introduced by the British government. This is one important point. It was introduced by the British government, and at that time it was called, I believe, Civil Services Examination instead of IAS. Instead of IAS or UPSC, at that time it was called the Civil Services Examination. I really hate this writing. And it was open only to foreigners, that is only to Britishers. So only Britishers could take part in the Civil Services Examination of India, and they can rule and they can work as civil servants in India. But Indians themselves cannot. So Indians themselves cannot work as bureaucrats in their own country. Right? How ironic. So up until now, only Britishers could take participation, could compete in the civil service examination. But after the Charter Act of 1853, even the Indian people could compete for the civil services. And now came the Act of 1858. Now how to remember 1-8? Then you only need to remember the word 5, and then again 8. So 1-8-5-8. You must put stress on specific words while speaking them so as to remember it easily. 1-8-5-8. So 1-8-5-8. 1858. So Government of India Act 1858, also known as the Act for the Good Government of India. Rule of company was replaced by the rule of crown. Now you might get a little bit confused here that the rule of the company was already replaced during the Regulating Act, or at least during the Pitt's India Act. It must have been completely replaced. So what are they saying now? Rule of company was replaced by the rule of crown. So I don't need to put much attention to it, because up until now, like you must remember, before the revolt of 1857, after the revolt of 1857, that is in 1858, the British Crown started directly controlling the Indian government. So up until now, they, like I told you previously here, where was it? Yeah, here, this point, that it ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, making it a purely administrative body. So up until now, it was taking the help of the East India Company in ruling over India. So still it had a kind of indirect influence over India. But after the revolt of 1857, it completely took into hands the rule of India. So it threw out the company completely. It said that you go back to your trading. In fact, you do not come to India. You have no work in India now. You go back to your simple trading thing. You have no right in any of the administrative functions that we do. And now we will completely see India's future by ourselves. So up until now, they were still using it as an administrative body, right? Like I said in this one, that it ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, making it a purely administrative body. So up until now, they were still using it as an administrative body. But after the revolt of 1857, they passed an act, Government of India Act 1858, and it completely removed the company's rule from India. Changed now it again changed the designation of the Governor General of India to that of Viceroy of India. I don't know why they like to change the name so much, but they did. So now the Governor General of India, the same position, was changed to that of Viceroy of India. Viceroy became the agent of the crown. So like you can say that these are formal things. So obviously this was the same thing informally, but now it came to be known as such formally in written documents, in particular written documents, like uh, like our governments. The governments always harass us, right? The governments are always doing whatever they want, but I formally change it in the documents, in the official documents, that I, from now on, I become the dictator of India. See, like I formally change it, then from now on I am the dictator of India. So it becomes official now. Before that also, let's say I was doing the very same things. I did whatever I felt like. I didn't care about the rules or regulations, but it was not so in the documents, it was not so in the written documents, that I am the dictator of India and I can do whatever I wish. But I officially declare it, that now, from now on, it would also be used in the documents, in the books, in all the legalized documents, in all the official documents, that from now on I would be called the dictator of India. So the same thing happened here. So the viceroy was officially known as the agent of the crown now. This act abolished the dual government of the Pitt's India Act. So it abolished now. Before now, the board of directors, what was the board of directors or court of directors? I believe court of directors, the board of control and the court of directors. So before now, the court of directors controlled the commercial affairs, right? Like I told you, in the Pitts, through the Pitt's India Act. But now it ended that too. The board of the court of directors was completely demolished. It was completely thrown off, that you go home, you take some rest, and now we will handle it all. This act also ended the doctrine of lapse, the very famous policy of the Britishers, the doctrine of lapse. According to the doctrine of lapse, if you do not have a biological son, then you must hand over your empire to the British government or to the English East India Company, to whoever was the ruling party at that time. So this also ended this policy. That's why the Rani of Jhansi fought with her life due to the doctrine of lapse, and uh, several other of our freedom fighters, freedom leaders. They fought so hard because of this doctrine of lapse, because they were not allowed to rule their own lands if they did not have a biological son. And obviously they knew what circumstances, what kind of things their citizens would have to go through if they came under the direct control of the British. So they fought for the freedom of their people, they fought for the dignity of their own people, and sadly they died. But they did bring a change, and we saw that change in the Government of India Act, or in the Good Government of India Act of 1853. 1853, is it right? Sorry, 1858, yeah. Of 1858. 1853 was the Charter Act, the third Charter Act. So the Secretary of State was a member of the British Cabinet and was responsible ultimately to the British Parliament. This is not so important. Like, established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of State for India. So these 2 points, I request you to read them thoroughly from somewhere else. Now moving on, Indian Councils Act 1861 initiated the process of decentralization by restoring legislative powers to Bombay and Madras. These powers were taken away. Yeah, if you remember, these powers were taken away through the Charter Act of 1833. That is the second Charter Act. The governors of Bengal and the governor of not Bengal, the governor of Bombay and Madras were stripped of their legislative powers. But now these powers were given back to them to start a process of decentralization. introduced representative institutions in India by associating Indians with the law-making process. So they started representing Indian people in all these institutions that they were setting up. How? By introducing the law-making process to the Indians, and by asking them to take part in the law making process, or by, you can say, by recruiting. Yeah, obviously recruiting, because they wouldn't let it go justly and rightfully. So they started taking Indian people into the legislative councils, into the legislative like I previously said, into the legislative council of Indian legislative council. Indian members were now given a position. So in the same way, and what was the reason for it? The reason for it was to introduce Indian representation in these new institutions that they were going to follow. So to better rule Indian people, because now they changed their policy. Now they, before their policy was divide and rule, but now their policy was understand, assimilate, and rule. Now they started converging with the people of India. Now they started understanding how the Indian people thought, how their thinking worked, how they regarded other people, and how to effectively better rule them. They started understanding the psychology of the Indian people. Okay, so after this, Viceroy nominated some Indians as non-official, still not official, as non-official members of his expanded council. Three Indians nominated were the Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao. It empowered the Viceroy to issue ordinances during emergency, so it also gave the right to the Viceroy to issue ordinances during a kind of any kind of emergency, because I believe they were still afraid of the revolt of 1857. Empowered the Viceroy to frame the rules of business. So what the rules of the business were, how business would be conducted between two parties. And the same power in today's constitution is given to the President of India under the Act 77. Statutory recognition to portfolio system. I don't know what this portfolio system is, absolutely no idea. So you can just look it up on the internet, as I too will. Establishment of new legislative councils for Bengal, NWFP, Northwest Frontier Province, and Punjab. So new legislative councils were formed for these three constituencies. Now comes the Indian Councils Act 1892. Though the majority of official members were retained, the non-official members of the Indian Legislative Council were henceforth to be nominated by the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and the provincial legislative councils. So obviously they had a tenure, a term for 4 years, 5 years, or some period of time, and after that they would have to be re-elected or re-chosen. So this work of re-choosing the non-official members of this Indian Legislative Council was given to the Bengal Chamber of Commerce and the provincial legislative councils. That is, the legislative councils of their own area, of their own particular areas. The non-official members of the provincial council were to be nominated by certain local bodies such as universities, district boards, and municipalities, and they would together choose one person or three persons, sorry to be real, to factual, three persons to be members of the non-official members of the provincial council or the provincial legislative council. Beginning of representative system in India. Council to have the power to discuss budget of addressing questions to the executive. Then comes Indian Councils Act 1909, also known as the Morley Minto reforms. These are very important. Remember the date 19, then comes 0, then again 9. 0 and 9 are very similar, so it's all like 1909. So 909 is actually very easy to remember, and in the starting obviously 1 is always there. 1 is always there. So 1 before was 1 7, then came 1 8, now comes 1 9, and after 9 what comes? 0 9. 0 9, 1 less than 10, you can say 0 9, 1 less than 10. Introduced for the first time an element of elections to the legislative council. So before now there were no elections to be members of the legislative council. The same members retained their positions throughout their lifetime, but now they introduced the concept of elections, that if you want to be part of the member, or if you want to be member of the legislative council, you must go through elections. So at the provincial legislative council means at the state level. So at the state level, the legislative council, non-official members would be in majority. So they said that the Indians would be in majority in the case of non-legislative councils. In the case of provincial legislative council, So you can say that the provincial legislative councils were very similar to today's state governments, and the central or the Indian Legislative Council was the same as the central government in today's time. And they're saying that the state governments would have more representation of Indian people, but the central government would still have the same Britishers. This is how you can easily understand it. There were two types of council: Indian Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council. Indian Legislative Council was one, Provincial Legislative Council was one for each state or for each particular area that they had designated. Introduction of separate electorates for Muslims. Now separate electorates were given to Muslims through the Monte-Mello reforms or the Indian Councils Act of 1909. It provided for the first time the association of Indians with the executive councils of the viceroy and governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as the law members. Now you know that Viceroy had two kinds of councils, like the Legislative Council and the Executive Council. So for the first time, Indians were given a representation in the Executive Council also. Like we must have read here. Sorry, not here. I think I have deleted it already. So, but I told you that the government, sorry, that the what am I writing? Move the scale. So up until now, what the situation was, that here it is: Governor General Council. So here it was Governor General Council, which was divided into two parts, like I previously told you: the legislative part and the executive part. The legislative part was given the name of Indian Legislative Council, where I asked you the opinion whether Indian Legislative Council is a good name or Parliament is. So it was given the name of Indian Legislative Council, and Indians were given representation only in this area, only in the Indian Legislative Council up until now. But after the Monte-Mello reforms, or that is the Indian Government Act of 1909, Indian Councils Act of 1909, Indian were also given a position in this Executive Council, which was up until now like deserted from the Indians, cut off from the Indians. Now they were given representation in this council, the Executive Council. And Satyendra Prasad Sinha was the first Indian to join this council, the Executive Council of the Viceroy, and he was appointed as a law member. Now comes the Government of India Act of 1919, 10 years exactly after that. Montague-Chelmsford reforms. Chelmsford, I don't know what his name is pronounced at, but let's say it's Montague-Chelmsford. I'm not able to speak it due to my braces. Montague-Chelmsford reforms. So the idea of responsible government was again stressed in these reforms, that we need to have a responsible government. It was again reinstated. Office of the High Commissioner of India was created in London. So a new office was created in London of the High Commissioner of India. You must read somewhere what the power of the High Commissioner of India is. Indian legislature became bicameral for the first time. Bicameral means it became two-sided. Bicameral means bifurcated into two. So having two governments. Okay, not here. We need to have Google here. Oh yeah, of course. A legislative body having two chambers, just like our current system is. So it's bicameral is a word specifically used for a legislative body. So a legislative body which has two chambers, like our current legislative body has. For example, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. The Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha are two chambers of the same legislative body. That is the parliament, and that is why our current Indian system is also bicameral. Communal representation was extended to the 6th. Secretary of State for India was now paid from the British revenue. Up until now, it was paid from the Indian revenue, but now it was paid from British revenue. Diarchy in provinces by dividing subjects of administration between official members and elected members. So official members were still the same, but now they had a new concept of elected members. Earlier I thought that the members had to be elected, but no, they retained the previous member, and they gave a new concept that more members would also come through election. So these two kinds of members were given their own subjects of rule of administration, that you have power over these particular subjects and you have power over these particular subjects. Created center state relations. So it now for the first time created a center and state relations. Obviously the provincial legislative councils did it, but it just reinstated that fact again. So the this is important for the Government of India Act 1990s is important only for two or three things. Only two things mainly. Office of the High Commissioner of India was created in London, and the second in Indian legislature became bicameral. These 2 points are important. The third point that could be important is that Secretary of State for India now to be paid from British revenue. Now comes the Government of India Act 1935. 19, then comes 3, 3 plus 2, 5. 19 and divide 9 by 3, or 3 times less than 9. Then it comes 3 and then 5. Or you can just remember 3 by that 3, that 9 is a multiple of 3. So 19, oh, we've come all the way up. 19 and 3, 9. Here were we? 3, 5, sorry. 1935. Provided for the establishment of an all India federation consisting of provinces and princely states as units. Residuary powers were given to the viceroy, abolished diarchy in the provinces and introduced provincial autonomy in its place. Introduced responsible government in provinces, introduced bicameralism in 6 out of 11 provinces. So it's like now the earlier system was, if compared to today's system, it was like we have a parliament which forms rules for all over India, right? So they had their parliament for each state, like and each state had two chambers. Each state's parliament had two chambers, had each one had a Lok Sabha, had a Rajya Sabha. For instance, this is an example, that each had a Lok Sabha and each had a Rajya Sabha, and they worked according to it. But now, as we know, we do not have two chambers in each state government. We only have one state government which forms all the rules, and there are no two chambers. There are only two chambers at the center level, not at the state level. But at that time they had two chambers at the state level too. So they brought these said that we will have two chambers. They introduced these two chamber mechanism governments in 6 out of those 11 provinces. In 6 of them they had introduced this concept. Extended the principle of communal representation, that is reservation of some seats, I believe. Communal representation by providing separate electorates for depressed classes. So they gave separate electorates for scheduled castes, for women and labor workers, for Muslims, Sikhs, Indian Christians, and all these started having their separate electorates. That you have your separate area, you can choose your own community's leader and you will only vote him. Like say that Sikhs have a separate electorate, so you Sikhs will choose a Sikh leader. You do not choose a Hindu leader. You need not choose a Muslim leader. You choose your own Sikh leader and vote him, and let him control, let him rule over you. Not rule is not the specific word to be used here. Let him take the administrative powers of your electorate into his hands, or you can say that let him be a puppet of ours. Abolished the Council of India established by the Government of India of 1858. The Secretary of State for India was provided with a team of advisors, established the Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. This is very, very important. This only out of the Government of India Act 1935, a few points are important, which are that abolished diarchy in the provinces and introduced provincial autonomy in its place. Extended the principle of communal representation, abolished the Council of India, and established the Reserve Bank of India. Also established the Federal Public Service Commission. Public Service Commission, Provincial Public Service Commission, and Joint Public Service Commission for two or more provinces. Provided for the establishment of federal court, which was set up in 1937. So everywhere the word here federal is used. Federal court. Federal court here means, sorry, like state courts. Like we have high court nowadays. So he said they set up federal court. Indian Independence Act 1947. Finally, we gain our independence. So you can clearly see how big of a journey it was from being under the control of Britishers, going through so many different kinds of acts to effectively live our lives which should have been ours from the starting. We had to live them through the acts, through the regulations set up by those foreigners for the Britishers. And finally, now we gain our independence from them through the Indian Independence Act 1947. You can clearly see what a silver lining it was. Declared India as an independent and sovereign state from August 15, 1947. I don't think I need to tell you to remember this date. Provided for creation of two independent dominions of India and Pakistan with right to secede from the British Commonwealth. So British Commonwealth was a kind of like federation. It was kind of a group like NATO is today. NATO is a group, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the Warsaw Pact is a group, or the BRICS is a group, the Asian is a group. In a similar way, the British Commonwealth was a group of several countries, and now they were both, before they had to be obligatory, means they were forced to become a members of the British Commonwealth, but now they were given a choice that now you can, okay, you can recede yourself away from the British Commonwealth. You don't need to be a member of it anymore if you do not wish to. It means that you are now sovereign. You are free from our control. If you wish to remain tied with us through this group, through this pact, you can. If you do not wish to, you can go. It's like they created a WhatsApp group and they forcefully added you, and before you had no right to leave the group, but now they give you permission. Okay, if you still wish to stay in contact with us, you can stay in this group. If you want to go, then you can exit. Governor General of each were to be appointed by the king, the on advice of the Dominion Cabinet. So, but now they said that, however, the Governor General for both of these countries, it would be appointed by the King of Britain, and on the advice of the Dominion Cabinet. Empower the constituent assemblies of the two dominions to frame and adopt any constitution and to repeal any act of the British Parliament, including the Independence Act itself. So it said that we give you power, that you create your own. So it's not like they completely gave you independence, that okay, we leave your country, we go away from your country, and you do whatever you wish to do. No, it still had power over India, it still had authority over India, and it gave India special permissions. And now these special permissions left with specific intentional loopholes, so that India can completely overthrow Britishers in a very official manner. So I know it's very like jumbled up, but this is how legal things work. This is how official things work. So I know it's like all kind of a mess. Why did they have to do this? Why didn't they could just directly say that you do your whatever you wish to do and this and that? Because there would have been anarchy in the country if they would have just completely left the country. And if they didn't legally said that we still rule the country, we still have power of the country, then what reason do they have to provide India with any kind of help? They would just completely leave the country. But no, they have formed some kind of relations with India over those past 200 years. They had their people, their families living inside India, instilled in here. So they had to leave India gradually, and that too after they were confirmed that now you can handle yourselves properly. So now they can say that okay, now we will go. And in the years to come, British British influence on India would gradually completely diminish over time. Abolished the office of the Secretary of State for India and transferred his functions to the Secretary of State for Commonwealth Affairs. It assigned dual functions, two functions, that is constituent and legislative, to the Constituent Assembly formed in 1946. So now we have a separate legislative assembly, right? And the Constituent Assembly is no more there. It was only till the Constitution was written. So up until the Constitution is written, who will handle all the legislative affairs? So that power was also given to the Constituent Assembly, that the members of the Constituent Assembly can also be members of the Legislative Assembly. So you can say that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar at that time was the law minister in India. I think he was the law minister if I remember it correctly. But he was also the chairman of the Constituent Assembly, right? So in this way, they had dual powers. The Constituent Assembly members had dual powers. It declared this Dominion legislature as a sovereign body. It said that this legislature would be sovereign body. It would not be under any control, bound by any government. Granted freedom to the Indian princely states. It also gave express freedom to the Indian princely states. That now you can join India, you can join Pakistan, or you stay free. We don't care. We give you permission that you can join both of these or you can stay free. So it's like the British government left his two kids to now grow up on their own. So the British government sent to kid India and kid Pakistan that okay, children, now you have grown up and now you do your now you handle your tasks yourself, and we will only provide you assistance from time to time, and that is if you so wish to. Otherwise, you can lead your life as however you wish. And it gave permission to the kid independent states or the kid princely states that now children, you have also grown up, you can either join your big brothers or you can just stay free, you can stay independent. So this was all done through the Indian Independence Act. Now this was only the very little part of historical evolution of how our previous acts came to influence our current legislative system, our current constituent system, our current ruling government system. After that, we will read the preamble, or I think in the next chapter we will read the basics of economy, just for a change of subject. And that is all, I believe. So see you soon.